Hey, Jeff Teper from Microsoft. I am so glad to be here at the biggest European SharePoint conference in history with the biggest contingent of people from the Microsoft product development teams we've ever sent to ESPC in history. Because I saw the hockey stick of adoption, the sort of S-curve, if you will, coming in the cloud. We announced in our last earnings update over 150 million monthly active users for Office 365. With SharePoint being by far the second biggest used component after email and Exchange. And so we see just more and more small businesses coming to the cloud than ever would install on-premises servers. And we sort of saw about 2 years ago the security concerns of the cloud not go away, but a lot of companies realized they had better security and governance and control and insights in the cloud than running their own servers. And so we see a huge number of big customers, including some that are speaking at ESPC with us, like Shell and Lego and so forth, going to the cloud. So one aspect of it was just seeing this incredible hockey stick in adoption. And then we had a big pipeline of news coming, not only with SharePoint, with all the things we had coming with OneDrive, with files on demand, and the access to SharePoint sites, and bringing AI and more real-time collaboration with the Office apps with OneDrive, team sites, adding more and more capability to SharePoint team sites, but also more connections to things like Power Apps and Flow, and of course Microsoft Teams. When the bulk of the attendees for that were still using on-premises SharePoint, it was a little tricky because say you had, at that point in the evolution, maybe 20% of our customers in the cloud using SharePoint Online, and maybe 40% at 2013 and 40% in 2010. What do you talk about there that's sort of a broad appeal? And so there was a lot. I'd looked 2-3 years ago, and the sessions were, using InfoPath or something like that, and or talking about customization approaches that were, 8 years old. And so now that we've got not everybody, and it will probably never be everybody, but the bulk of the market planning to or in the cloud, it means those sessions can embrace the latest technologies from us because they get the new communication sites, the new OneDrive capabilities and Teams. And so it's caused a resurgence in interest in things like SharePoint Saturdays because it used to be you only would get up to date every 3 to 5 years when you were deploying a new release. Now if you subscribe to Office 365, you're getting new capabilities every month. So you feel like, oh my gosh, it's been a year since I've been to an event. I better go to an event and learn all the latest things. And so that's, I think, why we see more and more new SharePoint Saturdays and why we see ESPC this week getting record attendance is the amount of new things that even in the last 3 to 6 months. So that in terms of communication sites, we'd go around the world and we'd go visit all these customers who built all these SharePoint intranets. It was very gratifying. And then you'd look at it and we'd hear how much work it was. And we said, wow, gosh, we could just do, not all of that, because people do want to integrate with different apps and customize a certain way. We could make it a lot more out of box. And so I guess it was about 3.5 years ago when I came back to the team, we really ramped up under a guy named Ken Fry, who's our design leader, a much bigger design team, and we said, let's really push the envelope about the out-of-the-box experience in SharePoint, and let's do it on a new client-side rendered framework that we now call the SharePoint framework. And so that was the sort of dual investment. One is out-of-box UI, and second is a new modern web stack that became communication sites. And as people see what they can do, I hate to say it, and I probably shouldn't, people look at it and say, that's not SharePoint. And I said, no, we have a new UI for SharePoint. We built it over the last 3 years. Come take a look. And one of the things that we showed at Ignite, but also announced and are giving out hard copies of at this event, is what we call the SharePoint Lookbook, which is a couple of dozen pages of the new UI you can build, new kinds of sites you can build with SharePoint. And it's really stunning. If there's one thing that anybody who's ever been associated with SharePoint should look at that we've done is this lookbook. You can search on the web on SharePoint Lookbook and you can see the kinds of experiences we're going into depth at ESPC about how you can use. And then you can still, if you've got a custom manufacturing solution that you need to integrate in a SharePoint UI as a web part or something like that, if you really want fine-grained control of a footer, if you really, really want to write that code, we have the SharePoint framework, which we came out with alongside with communication sites. And that is easily, and it's sort of mind-blowing because we have Outlook and Excel. The SharePoint framework in just the last 18 months since it shipped is the #1 extensibility mechanism in Office 365, which is sort of stunning. It usually takes years for these things. And so that tells us we've sort of hit the mark of an experience in SharePoint that's much more out of box, but when people need to extend it, they have a modern JavaScript framework to go do that. And there's some great sessions this week at ESPC about both the end user side and the developer side of SharePoint. We've been fortunate since the very beginning, even before we released the first version of SharePoint, that there was this vibe around it. And I think it's because people want to build lots and lots of solutions around SharePoint, whether they just standing up new sites or if they're writing a lot of code to customize the web UI or extend it with workflow solutions. And so the fact that it's this product that organizations adopt, they build many solutions on top of it, sort of attracts the flywheel of the community. And then we've been incredibly fortunate with community leaders like you and dozens of MVPs who sort of sustained it and hosted SharePoint Saturdays around the world and made events like the European SharePoint Conference a big success, that it became fun. It became more than just essential to keep up to date and talk about how to build these apps, and more of a family or a community, if you will. And it's really fun to come to ESPC every year and see that community in Europe come together in one place.